Hello. Today I'm going to talk about the inductive model, which is my second video on chapter 5 of Berger's Heretical Imperative. The book itself coming out in 79. So the full title of this chapter is The Inductive Possibility from Tradition to Experience. And today I'm going to look at two of the sections in the chapter, the inductive model and criticisms of the model. So in the previous video, we introduced the ideas of Friedrich Schleiermacher, and now Berger carries on that basis. Schleiermacher provides a particularly lucid model for the inductive approach. He also dominated Protestant theology for over 100 years until Barth's neo-orthodoxy emerged. Struggling with Schleiermacher's ghost was most noted in Germany, but it was at the core of liberal Protestant theology. For Schleiermacher and his followers, religion was defined as a specific type of human experience. For Schleiermacher, there's a multiplicity of religious forms in history. Each can be described and analyzed in terms of its essence, so any examination of a religion's truth claims has to be made by the same empirical and phenomenological methods as any other, that includes Christianity. Unlike orthodoxy and neo-orthodox religion, theology can't be conducted in a sanctuary immune from questions of historical science. Thus, the immense historiographic contributions of 19th century Protestant scholarship are part of Schleiermacher's heritage. Inductivism made it urgently important to establish how it really was as accurately as possible, whether referring to ancient Israel, the early Christian community, the developing Christian church, or whatever. A Protestant scholar had both a motive for this research and the theological self-understanding which allowed him to take intellectual risks. Therefore, even when such scholars came across historical facts that were disturbing to orthodoxy, as for example in biblical scholarship, they remained within the Protestant community, often as ordained ministers, without compromising their intellectual integrity. Systematic theology continually interacted with historical scholarship. This is seen very clearly in the school of Albrecht Ritschl, who was the principal embodiment of it. But the representative figure was Adolf von Harnack, who wrote the definitive history of the development of Christian doctrine. His work of scholarly reconstruction flowed directly from Schleiermacher's inductive premise. Harnack showed how the essence of Christianity repeatedly reasserted itself in different historical situations and human cultures. His book, The Essence of Christianity, which came out in 1905, based on a series of lectures which he delivered in Berlin in 1899, 100 years after Schleiermacher, tried to do two things. One, to describe Christianity as an empirical human reality, and two, to defend its truth claims despite that description. Unlike Schleiermacher, Harnack could draw on the results of a century of historical scholarship. Apart from his dominant influence on Protestant theology, Schleiermacher also impacted 19th century comparative religion and the history of religion, with his concern for comparisons and the phenomenological description of essences, and more directly 20th century phenomenology of religion, most obviously on its founder, Rudolf Otto. The Barthian Revolution sharply challenged inductivism in theology, but it didn't disappear during the decades of neo-orthodox dominance, even though the neo-orthodox supporters regarded it as passé. Theological liberalism resurfaced after World War II, as with Paul Tillich and Wolfhart Pannenberg. This was both sociologically expected and, for Berger, theologically welcome. Let's now turn to the criticisms of the model. We need to confront the criticisms of classical liberal theology because they apply to any other variants of the inductive model. and Berger identifies 5 such criticisms: the precariousness of the middle ground, the dangers of reductionism and subjectivism, the danger of legitimating the status quo, arid intellectualism, and historical ignorance. First, then, the precariousness of the middle ground. The inductive model occupies the middle ground between reductionism and deductionism. Therefore, this is a rather vulnerable and sometimes transitory position. Thus, many liberal theologians ended up with reductionist formulations. For example, the 19th century identification of the essence of Christianity with ethics, or Western civilization, or the American way of life. At an extreme, identifying Christianity with humanistic Western values or American democracy. The great liberal theologians never did this, but Berger obviously thinks that many other people did. More rarely, they slid over to orthodox or neo-orthodox positions. For example, a liberal who declared certain objects of faith to be beyond historical and inductive inquiry. For Berger to guard against this, it's necessary always to be meticulously inductive. No element of a religious tradition is immune to inductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning can never prove the truth claims of a revelation in the way that natural science validates a hypothesis. Religious affirmations always entail faith. Properly understood, faith and inductive reasoning stand in a dialectical relationship to each other. Belief leads to reflection and evidence gathering, which provides further motivation for belief. This is a more intellectual approach than that of the Barthians, and, for Berger, less conducive to fanaticism. Reasonableness has its own inspirations. Now we have the dangers of reductionism and subjectivism. This is an old criticism of Schleiermacher, that his anthropological starting point led to a Feuerbachian-style reductionism, which Berger holds is not valid. Nor is the view that a focus on the human reality of religious experience leads to an endless subjectivism, devoid of any objective criteria, as in the idea that I believe something because it feels good, and I don't examine the basis for my choice. There are bad examples of this, but that's not an intrinsic result of the method. Then we have the political criticism that seeing religion in human terms leads to a legitimation of the socio-cultural and political status quo, as in the German 19th century Kultur Protestantismus. This can happen, and led to rebellions by both Kierkegaard and Barth, who was horrified by the pro-war stance of his liberal teachers. But note that whilst Barthianism strongly resisted Nazism, many of its followers were later uncritical in their attitudes towards communism, and even provided it with legitimation. In practice, any form of institutional religion, regardless of its theology, is very likely to legitimate its socio-political world. No particular theological position guarantees social or political clear-sightedness. But note, however, that religion can also function to delegitimate the established order, regardless of its ideology. Does theological liberalism get caught up in the merely historical? Does it lead to only asking how it really was rather than is this true? Of course, any form of arid intellectualism weakens faith, but a true Rankian concern with how things really were makes God and the religious tradition of immediate contemporary importance to every generation. Finally, we have the problem of historical ignorance. Historians of religion clearly do make untenable historical assumptions, which are later disproved. For example, grotesque views of non-Christian religions, or the idea that early Christianity was all about ethics. This is not a problem of the method as such. No specific errors of induction invalidate the inductive method. For example, a chemist making a mistake in an experiment doesn't invalidate chemistry. So that's all I'm going to say for the moment. Many thanks for listening, and particular thanks to my patrons, Sina Fazal, David Langnes, Anthony Lee, Ian Palin, Johannes Rosenbaum, Steve Scholl, Ismail Valesco, Tobias Wetter, Tricia Williams, Jonah Winters, and Gloria Yazdani. If you want to support my channel, you're very welcome to do so. Please like, comment, and share if you will. Subscribe if you want to be notified of future videos, and I'll give Patreon and PayPal links below if you want to provide practical support. Next week, we'll finish off this chapter with a video I'm calling The Quest for Certainty. Have a good day.